Often said on the show that royalty and the underworld have often been, well, mixed, have they not? It's always been the desire, particularly in the 1960s, of the underworld to lure in elements of the British monarchy. We saw that really with the Perfumo scandal, if you remember, when, of course, His Royal Highness the Duke of Edinburgh, Prince Philip, was associated with, yes, Dr. Stephen Ward, Christine Keeler, Mandy Rice Davies, and suddenly that story exploded far more than it would have been in a normal circumstance. Now, if you think about this, in 1963, there was a very successful film starring Barbara Windsor called Sparrows Can't Sing. And it was one of those Cockney Sparrow type dramas that everybody loved at the time, an element of kitchen sink drama, plus, of course, a beautiful blonde with an infectious laugh and a huge fan base. Now, what was fascinating about this particular movie is the interior of the club scenes were filmed at this infamous nightclub in the East End of London, which then had a tinge of Hollywood and royalty attached too. Let me explain. Morning, good to see you. Neil Sean here in the very heart of London's underground. And we'll have a quick wave. I hope you're all right. Keeping warm, whatever you're doing. And of course, if you're still suffering from those terrible floods that we've got across the United Kingdom, I hope things are at least easing off a little bit. I'm not quite sure what the weather forecast is, but I know it's been dreadful for so many people. And there's nothing worse, is there? It's not so much that, it's the aftermath. I think is so terrible when you see what you lose. Won't go on about that. It's not positive, is it? Let's get back, of course, to your royal story of the day. And this story centres upon this particular drama. That's right, the infamous underworld of the royals and these two who literally ran the underworld of London in the 1960s, the Kray twins. And it features a Hollywood legend and a princess. Let me explain. 1960s were a sort of hedonistic time. Swing in London was taking place, the Beatles were asking to please, please me, and of course Twiggy was about to explode. It was a different time, a different era, and amazingly the gangster culture of London, headed by these two, the Kray twins, seemingly was something of all the rage. So many people wanted to be pictured with them. It's incredible to think, isn't it? Even the future 007, Sir Roger Moore, would dine at their club. Of course, at this point, he was simply the saint, but just that sort of alleged glamour was rubbing off. But they really wanted royalty. That was the sort of behind idea of the craze. They felt if they could get, that semblance of a touch of glamour. And the person that they really wanted was none other than Princess Margaret, the good time party girl who was never going to turn down the opportunity to, of course, meet, greet and mingle with the rich and famous, even though she was the most famous of them all. Now, their paths had crossed at a club called Winston's, which was famous, of course, for having the brilliant Danny LaRue as their regular cabaret. And that particular club really got so many people inside. It is incredible to think just who went there. None other, of course, than this Hollywood legend, the brilliant Judy Garland. Now, at this point in her career, Judy Garland had, well, shall we say, now finished with her film career as such. There was still the Valley of the Dolls to come, but that turned out to be something of a debacle. Now, the Krays decided to target Judy, and this is where it gets really fascinating because, as I say, in their quest to get some sort of royal attached to them, they figured that, well, the royals loved Judy Garland, so what better to try and woo her? Now, Judy at this point was married to the rather strange Mark Heron, another marriage that lasted, well, a matter of minutes. And as she said, she occasionally heard from him from a phone booth, which clearly was on casters because she could never keep up with him. But either way, at this point, they were sort of still newly married. Now, he encouraged her to have this picture taken with the Krays. She was reluctant, but, in Judy's sort of fuddled mind, as we now know at many times during her life, she agreed. They utilised this picture as a way to lure, as I say, the Princess Margaret into their club. But that didn't quite work. So they went back to Judy Garland and said, look, we will pay you X amount of money if you want to sing at our club. Judy, as ever, was on her uppers, didn't necessarily have a lot of money. The Palladium days, well, they were still big and people wanted to come and see her, but ready cash wasn't that abundant. Now, in terms of the money today, that would be worth around about, well, it was then 15,000, but it would be worth now far more, as you can imagine. And all he wanted, actually, was 3 songs. Judy, in order to oblige them, went along with this idea for the time being. So much so that they invited her back to their mother's house, where she serenaded the mother with a cappella rendition of Over the Rainbow. But then something really struck a chord in Judy, and she figured this possibly wouldn't be the best move, even though her husband of the time, Mark Herron, as I said, was pushing hard. Quite what he had involved, well, nobody truly knows. But at the 11th hour, no, Judy decided against it, citing, of course, being unwell so as not to offend the gangsters. And then they decided to drop the whole idea. The closest, really, that the Krays got to royalty was when Princess Margaret was supposed to attend at the ABC Cinema in the East End the premiere opening of that movie, Sparrows Can't Sing. And she was going to be attending with her husband, Lord Snowdon. But at the 11th hour, once again, the princess got a diplomatic cold and had to stay home. Lord Snowdon, though, always looking for, again, a good idea and a good way to utilise people to photograph, attended alone. But this wasn't quite what they wanted. So for once, the brilliant, and some say one of the best entertainers ever in the world, Judy Garland, literally did fool the Krays. And by default, of course, saved the princess. Neil Sean in the very heart of London.